Did you already say why you're starting at 8:15? I didn't know. Okay.
Oh, I can't see you. Was your camera on? Yeah.
My camera's on. I'm there. I can see you. Hi, Mark.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So,
anybody has an Haggadah with them, feel free to pull it out. If you happen to have one, I've got the good old art scroll one in front of me. Can't go wrong. Just don't put it on a plate of biscuits if you're planning to use it at your Seder.
You don't have your final bagel sandwich now.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to get underway, and just a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us, and for those who might still be joining the next few minutes. Part 2 of our discussion.
Yeah.
So Shmuel, it's good to see you back. How was your 2 weeks since we last spoke?
Excellent. Definitely. Now we're feeling that Pesach is here, is coming. No turning back now.
It is. The week has arrived.
So we may as well make the absolute most of it and make it as meaningful as possible. I should say, however, it's so beautiful to be able to go into a Pesach this year, very different than last year. I mean, last year we were kind of still in shock about not being able to spend Pesach the way we've been doing it for thousands of years with extended family and community and in shul and so on. But we've got through it. We've got through it, and here we are ready to celebrate a Pesach together with our families, hopefully. Community, shuls will be open. So it's a definitely something to celebrate.
When we sing Manish Tana, Laila Zeh, what's different this night from the other nights? Well, at least we have a practical application of this night. We actually, hopefully with other people outside of our family, or a bit more relaxed, a bit more less stressed in terms of what's happening around.
That's it.
Virus.
But I did hear a new version of the Manishtan of the 4 questions. No, did you get a vaccine? That's number 1. No, which one did you get? Number 3, did you suffer any side effects? And number 4, no, you're getting the second jab as well. There's 4 to go with.
And what about the 4? There should be the four children. The one who doesn't get the vaccine, the one who does get the vaccine.
Yeah, or the one who wears the mask up here or down on his chin. Yeah.
4 masks, exactly. So tonight, last time we learned, which was a couple of weeks ago, we started talking about Pesach in general, the themes of freedom, the themes of the Exodus, the themes of Pesach in general. And tonight we're going to spend a bit more time really looking at the Seder night and some of the insights into that. And so the amazing thing is when you walk into Gold's or any Jewish Judaica store, it's amazing how many versions of the Haggadah there are. And I'm not talking about the traditional text. I'm talking about with commentary, with insight. So it's beautiful that you can certainly find one that talks to you. And I think that one of the things that I always say is that although the Haggadah has its traditional words that just should be said, it's important that it has to include you in the story. To be relevant. So if you just read it for the sake of reading it without actually finding a way to make it talk to you, and you've just already made it very relevant to us with COVID vaccine. But honestly, I was listening to a talk by Rabbi Stav the other night, and he was saying, when you ask questions, when you try and encourage the children, when all these types of things, you need to really say, how is freedom of the Haggadah talking to me? What are the stories? What are the anecdotes? What are the messages? So tonight, hopefully, the two of us will share some of our favorite insights into the Haggadah. And hopefully those will be some things that you can reflect in your own Seder on Seder night. But the most important thing is tonight, if you have any questions, as we said, Judaism is all about asking questions. The Seder is a great time to ask questions. So don't be shy. Ask questions. We won't make you stand up and sing it out loud, your question, but you can type it in the chat box.
I thought you were going to say, if you have any questions, keep it for the Seder.
Okay, so Shmuel, want to kick us off?
Absolutely. I just want to on the tail end of what you just said, Rabbi Raven, you're right. So you walk into Gold's or even online, and you can actually get overwhelmed by the amount of Haggadahs are out there, different interpretations or explanations or commentaries, and I think it's a beautiful thing. And if you really, I guess the challenge, if we're all honest with ourselves, the challenge each year is how to keep it fresh and how to keep it relevant and how to get people to say, wow, that was a really good Seder. And one good way to do that is to find new material, is to literally look in, search up another website, or look into a different Haggadah that you don't usually go from, and find a different commentary, or find a different thought, or a different insight, or a different question. That is a really, really good way how to, change things up a little bit from last year and the year before. And yes, like you said, the Haggadahs today contain everything we need to know, besides our own voice. And that is absolutely vital, to bring our own perspectives and our own thoughts and our own thought-provoking questions. So definitely, I think it goes back to preparation. We've still got a few days left. If we really want to put on a good show, if we want to lead a good Seder, participate in a good Seder, we need to prepare for it. And if that means spending time looking up different interpretations, or having different props at the Seder table, or finding another story, then absolutely now is the now's the time to do it.
The interesting thing is, Shmuel, that well, two things. Number one is I was reflecting on what I had said and what you've just said, and I agree wholeheartedly, because I think we share the same sentiment. But at the same time, I don't want people to be scared, because it's not always about finding new things either. You've got to, your favorite song that you've sang, that your Zayd or your Bubba sang, or the different things that you're accustomed to, it's also good. But I think just going on the new things and making it relevant, I don't think there's a problem. And in fact, I would encourage it. And I know that at our shul, we're encouraging some new ideas, with modern context, this whole women's march, if you like. I think, listening to the voices of people who perhaps never had voices before, or their voices were shunned, or their voices were not equal. The climate change, there's a wonderful organization that is asking people to sort of reflect on the conversation of how we're looking after our planet, how we're looking after our world. So I think when we talk about freedom, like we spoke last time, the responsibility of freedom, and I think actually Eleanor, one of the people from the organization, is actually on tonight. So welcome, Eleanor, and well done for all the work you do. But I think, it's when we think about freedom, it's about responsibility. Like I think you mentioned last time, freedom is the sense of our responsibility to ourselves as Jews, to people around us, to our families, to the community, and to the world at large. So certainly to try and make it more, as you said, relevant within keeping with the traditions of the things that you're used to. So what's your...
I agree, Robert. I agree with that, Daniel, very much so. We need to make it very contemporary and relevant, and really discuss what freedom means. However, we should be very careful that we should ensure that the main things, the important things of the Pesach, don't get pushed to the side, because of other important things, but yet they shouldn't override what we're actually supposed to be doing at the Seder. And yes, it's a balance. It's a balance of old, it's a balance of new, it's a balance of tradition, and it's a balance of progress. Agree.
Wonderful. So what's your first favorite insight?
My first favorite insight is no sermons or speeches at the Seder. To anyone leading a Seder, no, it's not a time for speeches or sermons. It's about short and engaging insights, little sound bites, thought-provoking questions. So I think if we start from the beginning, let's have a look, Daniel, at the what we need to have ready, perhaps.
Right. So we got the idea of the Seder is an order, and I think
that's what it means. Yeah, we spoke about that.
The order there's got to be structure in life. So I think you're right. Let's do a little bit of structure tonight, so we don't get too carried away. And we'll go through the Seder tonight. And I think you're right about the speeches. No one wants to sit there, hearing somebody recite everything that they've ever learned, since they were a child. But at the same time, also people, you don't want to delay. People are hungry, so we don't want to keep them waiting too long before they eat the delicious food that they're about to be served. Okay, so you want to go? Let's go through what we have to prepare on that Seder plate.
Yeah. So if you haven't got it in front of you, or you're probably very familiar with what a Seder plate looks like, that's your traditional kind of looking Seder plate. There are various different customs exactly how to set up the Seder plate itself, but they all carry the same things on it. The Seder plate carries the same 6 things on it. So all in all, there should be 10 things, which is an interesting thing to think about. You've got 3 matzot, generally under the Seder plate. You've got the 6 things on the Seder plate and the Seder plate itself. So you're starting with the number 10, which Kabbalistically is obviously Jewish. It's a very Jewish number. but practically speaking, you've got the zeroah. The zeroah is the shank bone, and that comes in different forms. People do a chicken neck or anything meat on the bone, generally speaking. Chicken neck, chicken wing, a shank bone. Then you've got the beitza, you've got the egg, hard-boiled egg, and we can perhaps talk about the hard-boiled egg a little bit later on. You've got two versions of maror, one that you're going to use for maror and one you're going to use for the sandwich. And then you've got the karpas. Karpas is the vegetable that we're going to dip into salt water. Now, many different people have many different things for karpas. Karpas, the word itself, I don't know, Rabbi Daniel, do you know what the word karpas itself means?
You tell us.
No, I don't know. I have a feeling that karpas perhaps was a type of vegetable back in the day. I don't know, but you can use any type of vegetable so long as you can make a borei pri ha'adama on it. We don't use lettuce because that we're using for other things, but you would know karpas could be onion or parsley or potato or a baby carrot. Whatever your family tradition is. And of course, that's what we're going to dip into the salt water. And finally, the sixth thing on this Seder plate is your charoset. Charoset is that mushy mixture that kind of looks like cement, going back to the slave labor, to the hard labor that was that the Jews had to experience in Egypt. It is a sweet tasting dish, generally speaking. As a minimum, it's got a little bit of wine in there. It's got some apples, got some pears, got some nuts. Some people go all out and add some other things, but that is your basic charoset that is obviously prepared before Yom Tov. And once you have those nicely situated on your Seder plate with your 3 matzahs underneath, you're kind of ready to begin the 15-step journey through the Seder. Like Rabbi Daniel mentioned, it is called a Seder. There is a structure, but it is called a Pesach Seder. Pesach, we know, means to transcend, to leap, to jump, as we mentioned last time. So it's that combination of this structured journey, but also one that is supposed to encourage us to leave our own Egypt, to go beyond our comfort zones, to make that next step. So with that, Rabbi Daniel, do you want to begin with Kadesh?
So we start with Kadesh. And of course, Kadesh is a word which is very familiar to us as Jews, because it's used in a number of contexts. Of course, it means holy or to sanctify. We say sometimes Kaddish when we have to mourn for someone.
Yeah.
Make Kiddushin when a couple gets married, they sanctify to each other. And of course, every Friday night we make Kiddush on wine. And so our Kadesh begins the first step. And I think, we live in a world with non-stop notifications. There's alerts. There's things at our fingertips day in, day out. And there's pressures around us. There's Eleanor, thank you for sharing it from the Greek. The green karpos, meaning a raw, fresh, is from the Greek. Do you mean Greek?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, so there you go, a fresh, raw vegetable. Thanks, right. Google. Thanks, Eleanor.
And so we very much live in a very fast-paced world. And now we've been told to sit at the Seder, and you've got to now make it holy. You've got to make it sanctified. And I think for me, I always find that Kiddush really is that moment. And I'd suggest if you find a moment in the Seder for yourselves, but it makes sense nearing the beginning, but it's that moment where you just say, I'm now breaking free. I'm now sort of everything beside me, and I'm now going to, and in fact, Kiddush comes from the word to separate. To sanctify means you're making distinct one to the other, right? And so I'm separating my previous self, my distractions, the things that were bothering me, and now I'm going to focus on the depth of the purposeful, meaningful things in my life. And so I think each of us can reflect on our own questions. What are your distractions in life? What are things you want to focus more on? And that could be from a very personal level. It can be in a communal level. It can be on a global level. It can be in things that you're working on. And I think each of us has to ask that question on all of those fronts. What am I being distracted from in this specific area? So Kiddush is really making that separation. And so that's step one, is really saying, I'm now beginning. I'm now going to separate from the mundane to the holy, from the slave to becoming a free person.
Yeah. That's excellent. I just thinking that before, at least at my Seder, whether we do it at home or we do it in shul, traditionally we sing through the 15 steps. We kind of we process that we're here for for the long haul. We're going to get through from Kadesh all the way to Nirtza. And it's a beautiful idea to sit with a family or the community and actually go through the 15 steps. There's obviously the classic songs of Kadesh Urchatz, again, family traditions, of whatever song you sing. Say again?
What tune do you use?
I think we do Kadesh Urchatz, Karpas Yachatz. We also do Kadesh Urchatz, Karpas Yachatz. Yeah. There's lots of...
I was at FKI last year, or 2 years ago maybe now, and they do Kadesh Urchatz, Karpas Yachatz, Magid Rachza, Motzi Matzah.
Yeah, very good.
But I do the second one you do is the one we do. Kadesh Urchatz.
Yeah.
It is amazing because, when you do a communal Seder, you have so many different songs that people are accustomed to, and it's wonderful. I try and get people to sort of sing the song, the tune that they're used to,
Yeah, and that goes back to keeping things relevant and keeping people engaged, because you're dealing with a table full of hungry Jews, which is not an easy crowd. And if you want them to stay there, I think the aim of the game is to get them to stay there till the fourth cup, right, till the end, and not have an exodus after the chicken. But so another good way, I guess, is to involve people. Not to give drashot, not to give speeches, but if you're having guests, maybe ask them to share a thought, or even to have somebody introduce the next step. So you've started with Kadesh. So we then go into number 2, which is Urchatz. Urchatz is let's backtrack. So what do we do after at Kadesh, practically speaking, Rabbi? We actually drink the first cup of wine.
And what do we do to drink it?
Yes. So usually there's one person who will stand and have everybody in mind. But at the Seder night, we all get to make the Kiddush. It's important that we lift the cup and read the beautiful words. There's some extra words this year, given that it's a Saturday night. So we also make Havdalah, Reshecheyanu, and so on. Just follow your Haggadah as far as what to recite. And then we lean to the left when we drink that first cup of wine. We lean. There's many different interpretations as to why we lean. Generally speaking, we lean as a sign of freedom. We are now a free people, and therefore we lean, we recline to show that we are no longer slaves in Egypt. We perhaps are slaves, we spoke about this the other week, but slaves to other things and in our personal lives, but we lean. Why do we lean to the left and not to the right? Well, again, there's many different interpretations. Some say it's actually dangerous to lean to the right side. You could choke. Most people eat their food with their right hand, and therefore leaning and eating with your right hand doesn't really work. But you're supposed to lean comfortably, not only in the air, but on a pillow, on an armchair, on your friend's shoulder. But you're supposed to lean and drink the first cup of wine. So this is the first of the 4 that we're going to drink. Do you want to talk to Rabbi? Do you want to talk to as far as you're supposed to drink a full cup and how much one is supposed to drink? Do you want to get into that for a minute?
I think we can get into that, but just going back to what you said in terms of leaning, I know I always find it very funny because sometimes it's not very comfortable leaning and drinking at the same time.
Sure.
So try to make it as comfortable as you can, try to make it as enjoyable as you can. But obviously, as long as you're doing the ritual, as long as you're feeling it somewhat, then it's okay. So now, so as Rabbi Shmuel said, we have to obviously make Kiddush on that night and make sure that the cup that you're drinking has, there's varying opinions, but the most common opinion is 86 mils. Most of your traditional Kiddush cups will be okay with that, and lean to your left. And we at least we want to have enough wine to fill at least one cheek, and that's in terms of the amount we drink at one. That's about 45 mils. But if you can drink most of your cup, that's the best way to do it. I know I have a friend who's very strict. He does more than 4 cups of wine on the Seder night. I think he does about 16 cups of wine. He probably does 16 cups of wine every night. But definitely at the Seder night, you need to have your 4 cups of wine. But I think it's very important.
I hope you're getting your friends some support.
I was going to say, it probably wasn't a good joke, because there are people who struggle with alcohol. And if you do struggle with alcohol, you can certainly use grape juice, and there's no mitzvah to put yourself in a compromised position.
Absolutely.
Struggle with that challenge, and we're not here to encourage alcoholism. And of course, the wine is supposed to be enjoyed as a sense of freedom, but please don't drink wine if you have that issue or could lead to that issue for you. So Step one. So we made that separation. We're ready to roll. And I think what you said, that song might be that point for people. When you sing that intro tune about the 15 steps, that could be like, today we practice mindfulness. It's getting into the zone. I know that I love my cricket. I love my sports in general, and I know a lot of players have like the one thing that sort of switches them onto game time. It might be a particular action they do. It might be a particular motion, and so I think it's the same with the Chag. You're now getting into Seder mode. And whatever that might be for each of us. So we then move on to step number 2, and we'll try to move through the 15 steps. Obviously, we're not going to dwell on them for too long, each of them, because we'll be here all night. But so the next one is washing our hands, which is the urchatz. I'll say a quick idea that if you go back to temple times, the Kohanim, the priests, of course, would have to wash their hands before they served in the temple. And of course, this is our temple. This is we're making holiness in our homes. And I think over coronavirus, not that we want people not to come back to shul, but one thing we saw that the home was a mikdash me'at. It was a place of holiness, is where your home needs to be a place where God could be proud, where we could be proud, where our ancestors could be proud, where there's a moral compass in our homes in all areas, and so we wash our hands, I guess, almost as a symbol that this is our service right now to Hashem. We're also washing away the impurities. You're washing away the negativity. If you want to have a process of change, you need to, admit that there are going to be certain imperfections. If you don't admit that, then you probably haven't eaten enough matzah yet, because you still have the arrogance, right? Because humility means that you admit there's a mistake. And I think a lot of world leaders today, part of the issue, they never admit when there's a problem or when they've made a mistake. So I think we as Jews, our first step of washing our hands is that we picked up impurities, and it's now time to push them on and clean them.
That's an interesting point. Just to jump in there for a second, it's an interesting point about acknowledging mistakes. In fact, we're not there yet, but a large portion of the storytelling, which is a big mitzvah, which is one of the main mitzvot of the Seder night, Magid, we don't just highlight the good stuff, the fun times. We actually start from our humble beginnings, which weren't so crash hot, they weren't so flash, and yet we're not embarrassed and we're not ashamed to talk about them, our process, our journey. And that goes back to what you're saying, that to grow, which Pesach that's what it's all about. It's about spiritual growth. It's about personal growth. Sometimes you've got to get your hands dirty and go back to the past and examine the journey and see, this is where it began. This is where we're holding. This is where it can go. A lot of that is about washing hands. But what's interesting, Rabbi Daniel, that shouldn't we be doing it the other way around? Shouldn't we be doing urchatz first and then kadesh? Meaning, first we should be washing our hands and sanitizing. We know all too well about that in this day and age. Getting rid of the dirt, and then getting all spiritual, making kadesh and sanctifying ourselves. It's an interesting thought. We should be doing it the other way around. And maybe that's the power of. I'm suggesting that if anybody has a different interpretation, that's great. I'm suggesting maybe that's the power of Pesach, where we have the ability to jump into kadesh, to jump into this spiritual mode of sanctifying the day and becoming thinking spiritual, thinking holy. And then, yes, it's important also to wash your hands, but not to let it hold us back, because we may think that our hands are dirty or we have too much negativity and therefore we spend time washing our hands. No, we get right into the business of kadesh and then into orchatz.
I actually heard it's very similar to what you just answered yourself, but I heard an interpretation which asked that exact question, and the idea was that we start with kadesh because in order to make a transformation, you have to really believe that you are worth it. You have to think that intrinsically, all of us deserve it. And I think so much of counseling today, of sitting in front of a psychologist today, is because sadly people have been told that they're not important, that they're not valued. It might be from a teacher in school, it might have been from a parent.
Yeah.
I've met people, someone at school used to tease them, and for the rest of their lives they believe they're not worthy. And so I think the Seder kicks us off. We're not going to talk about your blemishes now, because we want to just tell you that you are holy, you are special, you do
very
count.
Good. Beautiful. And that's a great way to start.
Yeah. So now, just from a practical point, Shmuel, how do we wash our hands? Is there a blessing, no blessing?
Okay, so we go over to the sink. Now it's important to note, if there's a lot of people around the table, this can be a little bit of a lag. So whilst you're doing your Seder preparation, it's perhaps worth thinking, how can we keep the line moving? People have the custom of actually bringing the cup and a basin, a bowl to the table, whether it's the head of the household or to the elderly or anybody really, just to find a way to keep the line moving so you can actually keep the Seder moving. So we go over to the sink, or somebody brings a cup of water, and then there's various different customs, as there always is when it comes to washing our hands, whether it's 3 on the right and 3 on the left, or 2 on the right and 2 on the left, whatever your particular custom is. We do that with a cup, and we stop ourselves before we make the blessing, meaning we don't make a blessing after this washing. We are not washing for bread. We're not washing for matzah in this case. We are washing for a very interesting reason. We are washing because we're about to dip a vegetable into water. And when in the age of purity and impurity, which we don't really have anymore, but back in the day when they used to have purity and impurity, there was an idea of not eating a vegetable with wet hands. And if you would wash your hands first. It's not really a Jewish law that we focus on, but it's a perfect Jewish law to focus on at the Seder table when we're looking to ask questions and saying, what in the world, why are we doing this and why are we doing that? There is no reason, that is the reason why we wash our hands, because we're about to dip a vegetable into salt water for step number 3, called karpas. So no bracha here. You can talk as much as you like and nobody can shush you.
Right, we know no blessing, and we then move on to step number 3. Okay, so step number 3, as you said, is the karpas, and thank you to Eleanor for telling us the origin of the word karpas. And we're dipping now that vegetable, that choice of vegetable that you might like. It's about, you take a small piece, less than half an ounce, which is basically smaller than an olive almost.
Right, we say kezayit.
Kezayit, exactly. And you need to, this time you are going to say a blessing over the vegetable like we always do. And you're going to have in mind that this bracha, this blessing, has all the vegetables that you would be eating that night. And so we're all going to be very good boys and girls and eat all our vegetables like our parents had told us to do so many times. They should have just brought us to a Seder and said, look, you've got to eat your vegetables. So we eat the vegetable, and again, symbolically, I've heard a beautiful idea that, to celebrate the change, to celebrate joy in your life, right? The dipping of vegetable in salt water is now getting our feet wet, if you like, into the experience of pain and exile, and so we dip it in almost to taste that bitterness of slavery, to say, we're now going to hopefully turn that bitterness into tears of joy. So that water, I guess, has a symbol of both the tears of exile, but hopefully the tears of simcha. Sometimes you go to, we have the privilege of going to many weddings, and when you see the tears of the family, and like if you didn't know why they were crying, you say, oh, this person looks so sad, but they know that they're not. I wanted to say a special welcome, and not that anyone else who wasn't here isn't special, but my dear friend Moshe Galandi, who's all the way in Uganda. Moshe, can you wave at us?
Welcome, Moshe. Shalom Aleichem.
So Moshe he's the leader of a Jewish community in Uganda, and we've been trying to connect for so long. We've been trying to actually raise to get them a new phone. So if anyone wants to help Moshe get a new phone, I've sent them some money, but they could definitely use a new phone or a computer. Just let me know. But Moshe has been teaching his community, and he was so excited that they could join tonight to learn with myself and Shmuel. So Moshe, it's lovely to see you, my friend. And we'll unmute you later so you can talk to everyone and say hi to everyone.
Beautiful.
And they certainly know the pain of suffering, these young men. So
but you know what? There's nothing like a Pesach Seder to bring us all together like this.
Moshe was the leader who took the Jewish people out, and Moshe, you're the leader of your community there too.
That's it.
Now,
so you were talking about karpas. It's a beautiful point. It's a beautiful point. That various different water and salt and tears. There's various different tears, and it's that transformation. Perhaps I can think of another two ideas. The word karpas. Yes, Eleanor told us what that meant. But if you break up the Hebrew letters, you have, and take them out of order, you have this very famous interpretation of samach perech. Perech means slave labor or hard labor, reflecting the labor that the Jews had to do in Egypt. And samach, 60, numerical value of 60, which kind of is an interpretation of the 600,000. And plus who are involved in that slave labor, in that bitter hard work. So when we dip the karpas into the salt water, again, it's reference to that hard work. But there's a beautiful interpretation that dipping a vegetable into salt water, it's the most simple condiment. And perhaps it reminds us that sometimes we overindulge in and overcomplicate things in life. And we're talking about growth, and we're talking about a journey, and we're talking about spirituality. Sometimes we have to go back to basics and suffice with the simple things in life, dipping a vegetable into water and to be happy and to be grateful. Perhaps that's an interesting thought to think about as we do that as well. Not to go overboard every time. It doesn't have to be so luxurious every time, although Pesach is very much about luxury. We're supposed to bring out everything and celebrate in style, but in life, not to overindulge and to be content, to suffice with dipping a vegetable in water. And that's kind of how you're able to grow.
Absolutely. And I think, beautifully said. And just, I think it's important to remind yourself as you go through the Seder, and I try to do this, obviously when a communal Seder, you've got a bigger responsibility with so many different things going on. But if you have the opportunity, always just bring yourself back to as I said in the beginning, making it enjoyable, making it contemporary, making it fun, making it engaging within the tradition of the text that we've got. So like I try to think of a question, and again, this is ideal. Often you get, all your grand dreams and hopes don't necessarily, land at the actual Seder. But try and think of a question at each of these steps. Try and think of a question that it's asking, because the night is a night of questions. And so, that concept of tears that I was mentioning, try and think of a painful experience in your past that prepared you for joy, right? Like, and it's not so easy. You might not have it, and it might not yet have come to fruition, that painful experience that prepared you for joy. But I think, in times when we do suffer certain painful experiences, it does allow us to appreciate the joyous times even more. It's like you appreciate the light only when you've been used to darkness. Okay, so let's move on.
Very much so. All about making it personal and contemporary within the tradition. Absolutely. Can I just say that because this is the first thing really that we're giving out, not only the person leading the Seder is taking part of, it may be on your Seder plate, but everybody is taking part in this. Another way to stay prepared is to prepare all this in advance, to have enough karpas for everyone. And as soon as we go along, to have enough of everything for everyone, in a bowl or in bags. So you don't have to start looking for this and looking for that, but you're ready to go and you kind of keep things moving. So at this point, karpas, where everyone has their own little vegetable, make sure it's on the table, ready to go, just like the matzah would be, the wine, the lettuce, and so on. So we're done with karpas. We're moving on to step number 4, yachatz, right?
Now we're going to break the matzah, and just a little bit of a fun idea, which we always do at our Seder, is to do a bit of a vote, because what we're going to do, we're going to have to break the matzah, and that's the middle matzah, and we're going to have to break it in half while it's still covered, in fact. I mean, some people do it and make a whole spectacle out of it, but once you've broken it, is to get the table to decide and vote which is the bigger side. Now, I don't know, I usually have a really bad break, and it's so easy to tell, like one's tiny, one's huge. But if you're good at trying to get it snap in the middle, then it's much more fun to vote. I'm
on a bit of a roll, 2-3 years in a row where I'm getting it down the middle. So
I've got to do. But I mean, the interesting thing is the story of Pesach, the story of the Seder, is actually told over this broken piece of matzah.
Yes,
quite phenomenal. We start this, we tell the whole story. Now, just some of the practical things, and then we'll get into some of the discussion. So we take the middle matzah, we break it in half while it's still covered, according to many opinions. And we leave the smaller half between the other 2 matzot. And this is the matzah which we're going to actually be reciting the Haggadah. Now, the other 2 there, because we always want to have 2 whole matzahs like we have on Shabbat and Chagim. It's like we have 2 loaves of bread. The larger piece is going to be the one for the afikomen, or the dessert. And with this piece, there's a number of different options. You can hide it somewhere. A lot of people get the children to go on a game to try and find the afikomen.
You're held to ransom.
Scarf and so on. And somewhere just to keep it safe, because this is going to be the last piece of food you're going to eat before you make the Birkat Hamazon, before you bench. So why do we make, Shmuel, why would you think, what's your thoughts on why would we recite the whole Haggadah or the main part of the story on a broken piece of matzah?
Yeah, it is strange indeed if you think about it. Here we have a whole one. We break it in half, put the larger one away and the smaller side. And why are we doing the whole one? It's a really good question. There's probably many different answers and many different perspectives on this. Obviously, we're referring to this as lechem oini, poor man's bread or poor person's bread. And again, going back to the time where we didn't have much, we didn't have anything. We left with the bread on our shoulders. And again, it's bringing us back to that original story. But there's a beautiful interpretation that I just came across recently this year that I'll add to that question by saying, what's one of the first things we say when we over the matzah? We say this very interesting, we make this invitation, Kol dichfin yesei v'yechol, right? Anybody who would like to eat is welcome to come and join us, which is a very strange time to invite people whilst you're in the middle of the meal. If you're inviting people for your Seder, which is a beautiful thing to do, you do it in days in advance. You don't do it whilst you're already sitting down. It's a bit of a cheap shot to say, oh, we're sitting around a table. Now, anybody who wants to join us, when nobody can really hear the invitation, they come and join us. Now, I'm saying this because that is one of the first things we say over the half a matzah. So the interpretation that I saw was that when the Jews left Egypt, one of the reasons why we eat matzah, when the Jews left Egypt, there was no time. It was b'chipazon. They were almost chased out of Egypt. God was rushing them. Paro was rushing them, and they had to make food. And they made the most simple thing they can do: flour and water. And they put it on their sacks, and they left. Now, according to this interpretation, and you'll forgive me because I forgot where it comes from. I would love to tell you who it's from to give them credit, but I don't remember. Some were able to bake matzahs, and some were not able to bake matzot. Either they're not capable bakers, or they didn't have the time. They were too busy with their families. They didn't get a chance. And after they had left, a lot of people got hungry on the way out of Egypt. So here you had a situation where some of the Jews had, and some of the Jews did not have. And what they did was, the Jews who had took their own matzah, they broke it in half, and gave it to their fellow Jew and said, here, kol dichfin yeteh v'yechol, come and join me and eat. So when we are breaking our matzah and inviting others to eat, essentially we are just going back to the original story and saying, look at the selflessness of the Jews back then, where all they had was a matzah, yet they broke it in half, gave it to somebody who went without, and invited them to eat with them. And I think this is a beautiful thought. Again, when it comes to growth, when it comes to freedom, it's about selflessness. It's about giving what you have, not only giving what you have, but giving the bigger half away, snapping it off and giving it away. So that's one perspective to answer your question, Rabbi Daniel, as to why we're breaking the matzah and saying the Haggadah over it.
And that's the sense of true freedom, is being able to share with others. And I think, apropos to what you just said, I think there's another, I guess, a similar idea. When you're full of yourself,
yes,
too full of yourself, when you're not allowing yourself to be broken, then unfortunately you don't really have room to grow. But when you realize that you're just a fragment, when you need others, you need to be together with others, you need help from above, then you see things start falling into place. Then you see that the world is through a whole different lens. Like you said, when they had that first taste of freedom, and what do they do with it? They shared it with another human being. How profound. So thank you for showing that. It's really, really beautiful. And I think also we've got to reach out when we need help. I know that you're a big proponent of making sure that people's mental health is good. And I think this idea of being prepared to recognize that you're not always whole, that you may have been broken, is very, very
much so.
And reach out for help. Reach out when times get tough, and look after yourself. So we've broken.
There's times in our life when we all feel like a broken matzah. No question about it.
And now we get into the Magid. We're going to tell the story. We're going to tell the story of life. You got to look at your life. We're going to look at the journey of our people, the journey of your family, the journey of your own journey. And not just a history book. I think, again, it needs to be a story about today. And I just want to reiterate, and I think you said it very clearly, but I think it's worth mentioning. We're not deviating necessarily from the traditions that we set, but we need to talk. And as I said, I was very impressed with Rav Stav, who highlighted to me, and he said, you've got to ask contemporary questions. And I'm not trying to put you in the spot there all the time, Eleanor, but I love that idea that they, in a sense, getting the question of looking after our environment, climate change, and to put an item around you where you can sort of ask that question, and you can generate and stimulate the questions in our children's mind, in our own minds. So it's a really wonderful thing. They've asked people to put an ice block, which is quite creative. So don't forget, obviously the ones that the Sages Institute, but I think it does encourage us, and we keep saying it. We need to encourage our children to ask how are they going to be different, how are they going to make the world a better place. Moshe, welcome back. I see you obviously had internet issues, and so therefore every moment is an opportunity for us. The story and the message is that in each of us there's a leader, in each of us there's a force that can connect us to others, that can connect us above, that can make a change. So the Maggid is a story of the Exodus, but it's your Exodus. It's your Exodus, Shmuel, it's my Exodus. It's every single one of you. It's your story too. So let's start with we're not going to go through the whole Maggid, of course.
No.
The highlights. And I think we can't run away from the Manishtana, because that's obviously a highlight and a favorite for many.
Yeah.
We usually get the youngest children to recite the 4 questions. Different households do a number of different things. We usually start from the youngest, and then everyone has a turn, and some ask it in Yiddish, some ask it in Hebrew, some ask it in English. I've had a Seder where they asked it in Afrikaans, the South African. I once heard it being recited in Zulu. I've heard people say it in Russian. So all different languages you can ask it in. But the important thing is that you need to understand what you're asking, otherwise there's no point.
It's true. Having said that, Rabbi Daniel, talking about understanding what you're saying, any part of the Haggadah, while it's very important, it's lovely to be able to read the original Hebrew, but there's many parts of the Haggadah which I would say, if you don't understand the Hebrew, then by all means, it's probably more important to read it in a language that you do understand to make it relevant, not just reading through a book of words that you struggle to understand. But yes, the Manishtana. Perhaps we should also say that Maggid is perhaps one of the main, it may be the longest. You tell people to fasten their seatbelts and get comfy because we might be here for a while. But you're fulfilling one of the main mitzvot of the Seder night when we tell our story and when we look at what's on the Seder table and tell our history. So it's not something that we should skip, but definitely go through and keep it relevant. So yes, Manishtana. Away you go, Rabbi.
Right, and look, I think the whole Pesach Seder is really, as we said, it's supposed to help us pose those questions and revolve around questions. And it's interesting because I always say, like, has your child, maybe anyone feels comfortable to comment on this, but has your child ever said, Tati, why are we having salt water? I don't think my children have ever asked specifically the questions that was designed to be asked, but I know that often, my wife loves putting on the table, the different plagues, so she buys the fake locusts.
Yeah.
And they always seem to ask about that. They love seeing the imagery of it. So, and something which just sort of stands out. So I think it's important that we do ask good questions, and learning only happens if you ask questions. Our sages very much encourage questions, and you don't learn by keeping quiet. You learn by saying why, how, when, where, what's going on. We have to be inquisitive. If you look at our Talmud, it's full of questions. Not always are there answers, but I guess you got to ask yourself, what questions are you asking at this Pesach Seder? How are you asking questions of the people around you, of yourself? More importantly, probably of yourself. Ask yourself the questions that you need to hopefully find the answers to the year. So Manishtana is definitely a time of asking, and there's a lot of beautiful symbolism within the questions that the sages picked. Some, just very quickly, some talk about, one is just a minhag, one is a biblical commandment, and some have the custom of, I know the Chabad Hasidim have the custom of actually asking the custom first. And so many people say, how could you ask the question, which is just the custom, before the biblical question? And the beautiful insight is that sometimes it is the customs that really keep a Jew connected to their faith. If you go around on the Zoom call now, at least, and ask everybody to name, a favorite custom that they had with their families growing up, those are sometimes so much more profound and meaningful that when a person loses that, other things start to fall away. So we should never undervalue and underestimate the power of a tradition that you've received from your ancestors. Of course, the biblical ones are the ones that we're required to do, but it just shows you the significance of those. So yeah, I
Yeah.
love the Tanakh part, especially when you have a big Seder and you spend about 5 hours hearing every kid sing the Manish Tanakh. But yeah.
But that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. You know what I should say, Rabbi Daniel, you spoke about questions. You know what the interesting thing about the Manishtana is? They say that even if you're home alone, you're one person, which is, if anybody knows anybody having a Seder alone, either invite them or send them to Rabbi Daniel or myself, will find them a place. But if somebody finds themselves in a situation where they're having a Seder alone, they're still supposed to ask the Manishtana. You're still supposed to express questions, because like you said so well, the only way we learn, the only way we grow is through asking questions. So you ask yourselves the question, and then you give the answer. When you ask a question, you're basically admitting, I'm not perfect. I don't know everything. There's still so much to learn. And that is, again, a form of freedom, a form of journey out of slavery. So no matter who's sitting around the table, ask those questions.
We have an interesting question that is being sent to me, and that is that so far we've had physical and spiritual freedom. But what about celebrating mental transformation from slavery to free people? Is this at the heart of asking questions? Fascinating question. I think
excellent.
I think mental transformation is really a process of over time. You know, we don't expect that there's just overnight or transformation. I think these symbols that each of the steps of the Seder are telling us are there to give us the tools or the impetus to start working on that mental transformation. Because I think a mental transformation, like any mental transformation, requires habit. You know, if you want to really accustom yourself to not being a slave mentality anymore, how do you do that? Yes, you can have, you can give somebody, and it's like they say, somebody who just come out of jail. You see a lot of people who've spent a lot of time in jail. Sadly, that a lot of them want to get convicted again, so they can go back to that comfort zone, because everything was catered for. So in order to break out of the mentality, you need to become the habitual in the things you want to change. It could be in any area. I mean, you want to get fit, you want to lose weight. You can't just go to one seminar and hear a great tool and then you say, okay, I've lost weight, I'm now fit. No, it's that gradual and slow process. But the Seder night is that is the special change. And I think another question that's just been posed, and I'll let you add any other thoughts that I may have missed out or any other ideas, but it just is in terms of the understanding the Haggadah, how does it differ from the regular Siddur, and understanding the Tefillot every day that we recite in Hebrew. So the Haggadah differs in a sense because it is a process of a very strict guideline of what it is we're going from beginning to end, and we have a number of rituals. It's not necessarily just about praying. It is storytelling. It is doing different customs, whereas the Siddur is a daily prayer which represented the sacrifices which we brought in the times of the temple. So a very different, of course, similar ideas, but a different structure and a different book compared to the Siddur and the Haggadah. I don't know if you want to add anything to that or not.
Yeah, no, 100%. It differs in that way, but we all would recognize that if we're all still awake and Copious Mentor, so we can still concentrate after 4 cups of wine, we will notice that we say elements from the Siddur, from Hallel. There's various different prayers that do come from the Siddur. So it's a combination of historical storytelling, of current storytelling, and various different prayers from the Siddur as well. So it's a great combination of both. Rabbi, I think we need to move along. It's 9 o'clock.
Yeah, so
we're like those rabbis in the Pesach story that go all night, and we have to tell us, hey, it's time to daven Shacharis.
And we began this talk to say, don't talk too long. So,
that's it.
But we promised you an hour, and we've got about 10 more minutes or so left. So we'll try and cover a few more quick ideas. Now, as Shmuel said in the beginning, the beauty of the Haggadot today, they're very, very instructional. They give you great insights, great ideas on how to do things. So whilst we would love to have gone through every step to give you our input, I think, I feel a little bit more confident knowing that, each of us can follow and honestly, every year I have to look at the instructions. I forget every year. It's like, okay.
Very much so. Yeah.
How much wine do we put this there? So I think the reason it has the instructions is because we do forget from year to year. But maybe let's just throw out a couple of, each just pick two things that we would like to conclude with, and
Sure.
we'll open it up for any further questions, of course. So
Yeah.
what
You know what? I think I'll pick up on the last thing you mentioned in response to the question that you received about mental transformation. You know, we one of the significant readings that we do in Magid is the Vehisha Amda, right? That we acknowledge that although they've thrown everything against us over the generations, yet ultimately we have faith in God that He's carried us through, and here we are 3,000 years later after what we've been through is a miracle by anyone's standards. And yes, on the face of it, it's talking about anti-Semitism and confronting those who seek harm, who seek to do us harm. But I think on a deeper level, on a personal level, not to take away from its original level, is this idea of, in every generation, in every stage of our life, we do go through challenges and we do go through struggles. And yet, one way or another, we are able to get through them by what we do, by the ways that we cope, by our coping mechanisms, or by our sheer strength, or by support from others, and yes, by the blessing of God as well. So the Hisha Amda is a moment to think about not only what we're being confronted by as a nation, but what we're being confronted by as an individual, and that faith in God and the inner strength that we have, which is a reflection of Hashem, we can and will get through our personal struggles as well. I think it's a beautiful moment to be able to stop and think about the Hisha Amda, not to take away from its original meaning and from its current meaning, but also to make it personal as well.
Beautiful. Okay, so one idea that I love as part of the Seder, and one which I think we need to reflect on every year and remind ourselves, and every day, to be honest, Judaism speaks to it, and that is the Dayenu, the concept of gratitude, of Hakarat Tov, of being grateful to what we have.
Beautiful.
And I think each of us will see that through a different lens. Some of us have things which others would only dream of having, and so we never ever should take the things that we've been blessed with for granted, and also the responsibility that brings with it. If you are grateful, I think it does give you that sense of responsibility to others. And COVID, I know we've dwelled on COVID a lot because that's just the natural thing that's happened to all of us. But COVID, I think for me, really made me appreciate so many parts of my life that I wouldn't say I didn't appreciate, but maybe I didn't even recognize. It wasn't even at the forefront of our mind. Going to a shopping center without being scared, or going to shul. Who would have ever valued that as something which, and of course some of our ancestors went through it in a far worse way than we have. But I think Dayenu, it's saying to Hashem, I'm grateful for what you've given me. And I always try and think of at the Seder, especially when I've had the chance to do it with the family. Usually I've had 2 communal Seders for the last number of years. We've always had, I always try and get everyone around the table to just reflect on something that they're grateful for. And it does again make it more real, make it more practical. And after we've recited the actual song of the Dayenu, so I love that part, and I think it's worthwhile showing that appreciation and committing at the Seder in your mind how you're going to show appreciation, because appreciation and gratefulness it's not there to just be in your head either, because if you
that's right, it needs to be expressed.
If you want to tell your spouse that you're grateful, it's very nice if you think about it, but it's even nicer if you actually tell them how grateful you are for what they've done for you, or your boss, or your work, or your colleague, or your friend, and so on. So Dayenu is so practical, so important, and so current and relevant.
Yeah, you can't just say I love you under the chuppah and then say if anything changes I'll let you know. Yes, so there's been some questions. I think just before we get to the questions, maybe just to remind to understand that after Magid and after washing our hands, perhaps the greatest mitzvah, or the greatest highlights, you can say, for some at the Seder, is eating the matzah. So it's definitely very important for us all to partake in some matzah, preferably some good old hand-baked shmura matzah, at least for this part of the Seder, to eat it, to enjoy it, to understand why we're eating it. As you chew it, it gives you enough time to think about what we've been through, what we're going through. Matzah is considered a bread of faith and a bread of healing. So really to internalize that message of strength and of faith and of healing as we go through the Seder. So definitely matzah is something definitely a definite highlight. If you need shmura matzah, you can ask myself or Rabbi Daniel. I'm sure we can get you some for your seder, but definitely a very important part of the seder. Do you want to finish with any of those questions that came in, Rabbi?
So there's a great question by Alan about the contemporary takeout of the four children. You know, the wise child, the evil child, the simple child, and the
yes,
child who doesn't know how to ask questions. And again, so many beautiful ideas. One idea, I think, of course, which I think we all can relate to, and that is that all of us need to sit at the table together, regardless of, you know, your background, regardless of your viewpoints. We need to find a way to find a common theme and a common place, and to believe that we're all fit around the table. All of our voices have to be heard. And I mentioned in the beginning, you know, the idea of, unfortunately, we've seen how women have been treated, how their voices have not been heard. And there's many voices that have not been heard. You know, sadly, a number of years ago, we saw how children were not being heard, you know, through the whole child sex abuse, you know, saga that was going on. And, you know, fortunately, by some courageous advocates who were prepared to stand up and make their voices heard, we saw incredible change. So I think, you know, the four children at the Seder, I think, in a contemporary way, can be about the different voices that need to be heard. And sometimes you may not agree with all the voices. You know, one of my favorite ideas is, you know, the idea of Shalom Aleichem, you know, the way that we greet each other in Judaism.
Yeah.
Shalom Aleichem, and the response is Aleichem Shalom. And, you know, you ask yourself, one second, I said Shalom Aleichem, why can't you respond back Shalom Aleichem? Why do you have to say the complete opposite of what I just told you? I'm saying Shalom Aleichem, you saying Aleichem Shalom. And I think the idea is that when we say hi to each other, we're saying that even if we don't agree with each other, even if you see the world completely opposite to the way I see the world, we're still going to be friends. We're still going to have respect and care for one another. And I think the four children sitting at the table, and of course, each of the children can be viewed as a child. And as we know that each of us have a child within each of us. And so all of the children I saw, I think Chabad put out recently, I got an email today and it said that perhaps the four children represent each of us at a different stage in our lives. So they may not be, they might not be human beings, but they're four aspects of ourselves, four parts of ourselves, four elements of ourselves at different parts in our lives. Sometimes we're wise. Sometimes we all have a bit of a wicked side. Sometimes we all have a part where we don't know how to ask. We don't speak up. And sometimes there's times where we are simple, where we just want to enjoy life simply without the grandeur. So so much contemporary wisdom within that little saga, within that little section itself. I'll let you take on the final question.
I have often wondered, when we retell the story of the Exodus of Pesach, why does the Haggadah not have the direct quotes in the book of Exodus that we have to read? I've one. We tell the story of Exodus of Pesach. Why does the Haggadah not have direct quotes from the book of Exodus when we have to read out? So when it comes to Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, we're very careful to quote biblical verses. In fact, if you're going to do any of Magid, that's a very important part to do, where we say this is what Pesach is, and this is why we eat the matzah, and this is why we eat the maror. But you're asking as far as the Exodus is concerned, I'm pretty sure that throughout there are parts of the Haggadah where we do mention the various different elements of the enslavement and God listening to our cries and so on. So unless I'm not understanding the question correctly, Rabbi Daniel, do you understand that one?
Reading it again as well. Hold on. Why does the Haggadah not have direct quotes from the book of Shmot? Good question. Again, you see, you've stumped the rabbis. There you go.
I mean, there are quite a few. I mean, at the beginning of Magid, Avadim Hayinu, obviously that's not from Exodus, but they've got where is it here? You know, the whole story of going down into Egypt, Vayeret Mitzrayim, Vayagar Sham. So there are various different verses that we do pull out of the biblical text that very much bring the story to life. I apologize if I've misunderstood your question, but I think I think I've answered it. Yeah, Rabbi Rabin, I agree about the four sons. It's not always about. I mean, it is very much about listening to other people's voices, but remembering that we have those four voices within us as well, and to respect those voices and those feelings as they come along. We're multidimensional people, very much so. Leon has a question there. Do you want to take that, Rabbi Rabin?
What is the halachic midnight in terms of the Afikomen?
That's a very good question. I can check that up for you.
Well, the halachic midnight tonight is 1:26 a.m. I'm not sure what it will be on the Seder night, but somewhere around there.
It will be a little bit earlier, but yes, that's right.
So yeah, if you look at any of the calendars, Manim, you've got myzmanim.org, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So okay, a couple of other last minute things. You want to just anything else you want to ask?
Are there any other questions, or is that pretty much it?
Now, I think going back to the question I think that was asked by Benny, there's a very similar question. I'm not sure if that's what you were hinting to, Benny, but I believe that if you look in the Haggadah, Moshe Rabbeinu is not really mentioned either. Right?
That's right.
No real reference. And the question is, why not? And I think one idea that I saw, and perhaps this is we could answer your question, Benny. I think the Vilna Gaon answers that question by saying that if he mentioned Moshe once, it would have to be really, you have to mention him throughout the story. And then what would happen then, the story would basically revolve around Moshe. And so people will then start to think, well, it wasn't actually God's influence. And so it will then become that Moshe was in a sense the hero, which does at times happen, although we do say by Yaminu B'Hashem and Moshe Avdo. But really the essence of Moshe was that he was just a servant. He was just a servant of Hashem. And I think going back to what we said earlier, it's a mitzvah about ourselves too. We're the Moshe in the story. You know, we've got to find how we can become the person who makes the difference, right? You know, Judaism is not about heroes or heroines. You know, it's not about, you know, of course we have saints and we have, you know, great rabbis and rebbitzins and holy people who've lived before us, but ultimately it's about us. We're also holy. And like we said in the beginning. So perhaps that's why they don't mention the direct quotes from Shmot. I don't know exactly.
But it's a brilliant point about Moshe. Again, it brings up the whole idea of humility of a true leader. After all, he carried it all out. Yet when he composed much of the Haggadah, he chose not to reference himself at all. And you know, and I can actually can make a correlation between answering another one of your questions, Rabbi Daniel, about why we say the Haggadah over half a matzah. It's also a beautiful thing to think about. You know, we all do good in our lives, but not all of it do we have to flash all over town. You know, so it says we break the matzah in half, and the small half we put back into the Seder plate. We uncover it to show, yes, we do good in our lives. We're good and upstanding citizens. But the big half, most of the good things that we do, we don't have to show to people. We can put that and hide it away as the Afikoman. And that's perhaps what Moshe Rabbeinu is all about as well. He was, after all, the leader, and yet he was the humblest of them all. Incredible humility, and his name is indeed not shown. Just like the matzah, which is flat, which lacks ego, it lacks arrogance. It's just you do what you need to do. Not everybody has to know about it. And here we are all these years later.
And I think also you know reminded me that, you know, Moshe was about the cause. He wasn't interested, like you said, you know, so many times we get involved in a cause that we forget about the cause and it becomes about ourselves. Moshe Rabbeinu was prepared to hide his name, technically, if he had a choice, in order that there would never be a confusion as to who was the true savior. His cause was to believe that we now began to become declaring us as a nation to Hashem. And so he said, you know, I don't want to have any misconceptions about it. You think I was the savior. And so he was prepared to, for the mission at hand, for the cause that he fought for. It was so important to him that you know, mission statement was never lost from it. And I think anyone who works for an organization, I know as a rabbi, sometimes, you know, you got to be very careful. It's not about you. It's about the message that you're trying to share with others. So it's been wonderful to discuss this with you once again. And again, thank you to all of you who have joined us.
Thank you. Yes.
We very much appreciate your company, because otherwise it'd just be me and Shmuel talking to each other, which we don't mind either. But it's definitely nice having the wonderful company that you all bring with us. And please God, next year, I was thinking to Shmuel, we'll do this in person. We'll have a round table at one of our shuls, maybe first week at our shul and second week at your shul, and do it with the human touch, the human experience, the human connection. As much as we're grateful, Dayenu, with Zoom, we still want to have other experiences as well. So look, we want to wish you all a Chag Pesach Kasher V'Sameach. Make the Seder beautiful. Make it meaningful. Bring in the things that are going to talk to you, to your families, to the things you want to share with everyone. But most importantly, have a good time.
Yeah. And don't forget, you are the most important. A Seder without people, you can have all the matzah and the maror in the world, but it's all about the people. So engage yourself, engage others, make it alive, and really have a liberating Pesach and a meaningful Pesach, as Rabbi Daniel just mentioned. Good Yom Tov to all. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach to everyone. We'll just end the live stream.